Hi, my name is Alex Dalziel. I am a senior fellow and the National Security Project Lead at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. Welcome to Inside Policy Talks. Economic security has been high on the international agenda for the last few years across the Indo-Pacific region, the North American continent, and certainly in the Euro-Atlantic area. Among the issues that top this agenda are the ensuring the supply of critical minerals and rare earth elements that go into the digital products that we use, into the batteries, and into solar panels that will increasingly become part of our energy mix in the years to come. Today I'm joined by Jüri Seilenthal, who is the Director General for Trade Policy at Estonia's Foreign Ministry, to hear a little bit more about the Estonian case and how they're approaching economic security and the energy transition. Jüri, tere tulemast, welcome, bienvenue to the podcast.
Alex, thanks for having me, and good to hear that Canada has already a third official language that you are using.
Thank you so much for this time.
I think it's a very good chance to speak about one of the aspects of let's say trade policy, which is my angle that I look at the things. But economy in general, the Estonian experience since regaining independence in 1991 so far has been that everything has been getting better, and getting better actually with quite long steps. So we managed to regain our independence. Then we got rid of the Russian troops. Then yes, we had some hiccups in the economy, but in general the line was pretty clearly up and up and up. And then in 2004 we joined the EU and NATO, and the economic growth continued. And like our bankers tell us, it was also in part due to the fact of the convergence effect with the rest of Europe. European countries very quickly became our main trading partners, and so on. But now we are coming to a junction where things, it seems to me, are starting to change from what we were used to now over these, let's say, grosso modo 30 decades, which is basically more or less what my professional life is in its length as well. And we see disturbing signs on the horizon. For us specifically, the conflict in Ukraine, we of course knew that before. We knew very clearly from the Georgia attack in 2008, and maybe even before, when we had the so-called bronze soldier issue in 2007, that Russia is back to its old ways. I mean, we had small problems with them basically since 91. I remember when I joined the ministry in 95, and everybody had to be alert on a Friday afternoon. What will they create for us? Either a problem with the train on the border or something. But then, let's say from somewhere 2000 till 2007, it was a calm period. But since then, it has become worse and worse. But for us, certainly the big neighbor to the east is the big problem. But at the same time, what has happened in between is that behind that big neighbor, there is even a bigger country, specifically referred to China. And now we discover ourselves in the world where we have allowed all the, or let's say quite a lot of substantial and advanced production capacities and the full chain of production to accumulate in one country. And of course, we can choose to believe the benign explanation that this is just the market forces working. But I think this is actually not true, and we shouldn't kid ourselves. If one reads even the English translations of Chinese policy documents, that has been their intention from the start. And people who actually read the Chinese say that in the same document's original version, it is even much more clear. I think there's a Foreign Affairs article about that as well, about a year and a half ago, which basically says that this was China's strategy for now more than 5 years. Having capability to produce everything, starting from mining the materials and selling the very sophisticated end products. And if it would be with one product, then one could construct the thought that it's a balanced architecture, and we have another product, and then we sell to them and they sell to us, and that's fine. But actually, it seems to be that quite a lot of critical capabilities have accumulated in just one or a couple of countries. And some of those countries are not rule of law countries and democratic countries. And some of those countries, including China, actually say that they believe the future should look like their social system is. So this is very clear challenge to what we are and what we want to be and what future we want for us. So of course, the only rational approach to this is now we need to start doing something about it. So this would be what I would say is let's say the national starting point. And of course, since we are members of the EU and trade policy is done all the EU together, we are of course contributing to how EU is setting its trade policy. And as you know, of course, the economic security has now in the last year and a half also very strongly featured in the European economic thought. Mm-hmm. And this leadership has actually come from the European Commission to quite an extent. At the same time, some big European companies have been really vocal in lobbying their own governments without making mention specifically which ones, saying that, most of our growth comes from China, we need to be in China and so on. So there are, let's say, contradictory forces at play, but we certainly need to pay more attention of how we handle our economic relations and interdependencies. So I hope that was more or less for the first answer in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, those who know Estonia for its amazing strides, as you put it, since 1991. Much of this is in e-governance, innovative programs like e-residency and just technological savvy in general. Of course, I think we share a lot of aspects of threat perception when it comes to challenges on the international security stage, but also this increasing intersection of economic power with geopolitical aims. And, I think beyond the questions of geopolitical, perhaps coercive economic manipulation of such things as critical minerals, rare earth elements. And we also have learned from the COVID pandemic that, having absolutely centralized supply of some of these, most critical elements of technology, health, economy is probably not the best idea. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about, Estonia is a small country, 1.2, 1.3 million people. It has its own distinct national interests and challenges. I'd be a little bit interested, maybe dive down a bit to hear a little bit more about how in particular Estonia fits into the critical mineral rare earth element supply chain and interesting value chain. Because I think, again, most people, their first thought, I've traveled to Estonia a number of times and was very, interested to learn earlier this year about how Estonia has some distinct assets when it comes to these supply chains.
Well, maybe the answer in two parts. First is that we paradoxically inherited from the Soviet time and enrichment facilities which are situated in the town of Sillamäe, which started out as what was then called the numbered factory, so factory without an address but just a military number, which was enriching uranium for the Soviet Union for slightly more than a decade, and then was reprofiled into the rare earths. And in 1991, when Estonia regained its independence, we also got this factory, but this then was privatized, and then it was owned by Molycorp, and now it's owned by NPM, Neo Performance Materials, which I believe is a Canadian origin, publicly listed company. And that is still producing some of the rare earth metals. So that's where we come in today. We are not having the local feed stock into that production. So we depend on imports, and they come really from around the world. I understand they have some plans with Australia, some of it comes from US, some of it comes from, I think, also from Brazil or something like that. Some other, it's technically very complicated, and I'm not an expert, but the fact is that they are a good employer, and they are doing pretty well when the critical minerals market prices are, I would term, normal. At the moment, they are not doing well because it seems to be a case where China, which controls in some of those minerals between 90 to 100% of the market, seems to be playing for the possibility to basically drive others out of the market. Seems that they have been able to build up stockpiles, and at the moment are releasing them at least to their own producers with definitely suspiciously low prices. So that's one of the things that we have. And the second one is that Estonia paradoxically has been a mining country for a long time. Most of it was oil shale, which is rather similar to coal, but I believe in Canada you also have oil shale, so it's just the origin of the plant is different. So if I understand correctly, oil shale is algae based, and oil and coal is wood based. So, but in the end, it's a rather polluting material that we use mostly for energy production. But that we will be able to reprofile for the chemical industry. But we also have phosphites, and our geological survey tells me that with the phosphites there are all other interesting, not all, but quite a lot of other interesting minerals as well that maybe could be used in the future. We are not at the moment mining phosphates. If you look back into the Estonian history, the struggle for us regaining our independence in '87 started with the protests against phosphate mining in big open pits by the Moscow Central Planning, whatever mining ministry agency type of thing. So that will be a hard issue with the population. But we believe we can explain it that there is a difference between how we mine and how it was done before, and then the dilemma, of course, will be: will we keep it in the ground, or do we think we have an economically and environmentally viable solution to go ahead with it? It's in Estonia the responsibility of our climate ministry. It's a new ministry, but they also are responsible for the geology side. And I think they will try to do test mining and test production in a couple of years, and then look for a possibility to have a concession agreement with one of the established mining companies who would have the know-how. And then we will be also participating on the side of the raw materials in this whole process. And if you want from the third end, then we don't own it, but Ericsson, some people might know, it's a Swedish company, is having one of its scientific and development centers. I think it's one of the 4 they have around the world here in Tallinn. And they are enlarging and building it up. So what comes out of here looks like, mobile, whatever you call them, the base stations and antennas and things like that, which they then develop the new ones, the advanced 5G things and so on here, and also some production here, but the onus is on developing that. So I would say that's the maybe 2 or 3 points where we touch in on this, so we are not just consumers. And also I think it would be important to explain to the people that if you want computers and smartphones and so on, one option is really to think that everything is mined somewhere else. But first, is it sustainable? And the second one is, you need to make money some way as well. And actually, the oil shale mining is going down because we are reducing our energy consumption and reducing our carbon emissions. So maybe, let's say, the overall environmental impact as a sum in that case will not only add to that, but it will maybe help also with the savings on the other side.
Yeah, that's the collection of issues that go into economic security questions, are very diverse, and so I think you've given a good sense of that. So as Estonia has to, potentially has mining and extraction opportunities. It has some processing opportunities, which is very, very rare outside of China for some of these very important inputs to technology. As you mentioned, the Ericsson. Telecommunications company and its resources, going into more scientific research, industry-oriented research. In terms of the high-end manufacturing, I believe there's also been some developments in terms of magnets. And I'd be interested to hear more on that point as well.
Yes, the same NPM is building permanent magnets production facility in Narva, basically on our eastern border, literally.
This is Neo Performance Materials again.
Exactly, Neo Performance Materials again. And this is also interesting because it's the Neo investment, but also it had, let's say, the public sector side support with European money through the Estonian government, and the Estonian government's responsibility put into that project. So I think the overall volumes were over 100 million, and the public money support was close to 20 million, if I now by heart recall the numbers right. Which will be also very interesting because, of course, permanent magnets are the ones that help the electric motors be be more efficient. And of course, then the NPM Silmet facility would be as one of the input feeds to that production on location as well. So yes,
what I think would be interesting for our audience, Jüri, would know a little bit more about Narva itself and some of the challenges there and opportunities that this plant, the kind of context in which it's being built.
Yes, well, Narva is probably the nicest and I think also the oldest town in northeast Estonia. It sits exactly on what is now border river with the Russian Federation. On the other side is the sister town Ivangorod. Narva is in Ida-Viru counties. Ida-Viru county in the Soviet time was heavily industrialized. It was mining, it was production and so on. And also quite a substantial population shift was affected during the Soviet occupation. So the majority of the population in Ida-Virumaa is actually Russian speaking. And in Narva, I think it's well over 90%. So this is also very important in that sense, that shows the confidence of the government that we can put an investment into the region of that kind. And what also can be said about Ida-Virumaa, that in other parts of Estonia, there's quite a lot of this NIMBY effect. Don't build your new whatever pulp mill.
Not in my backyard, yes.
Anywhere close to my university town, specific case that we had. But in Ida-Virumaa, there doesn't seem to be this apprehension towards industry and mining, at least not yet. And it's also a good test case because during the last 30 years, when we've been reducing carbon emissions, but we have been also filtering the existing emissions to quite a substantial amount. So there are some very interesting success stories. For example, children's lung diseases have more than halved and so on. So there's also, let's say, local perception that industry can become better and can become cleaner. And actually, when the magnet factory will be running, we estimate that it will be our biggest energy consumer. So that will be also very interesting to see how that will run. They claim that, if I understand correctly, that they think they will be consuming up to 10% of our energy production. So that will be also a very interesting development.
So you've raised a couple of points there that I think are worth expanding the lens on. You've spoken about the role of the European Union and European funding, et cetera, in some of this. I think some of the challenges we face here in building more secure supply chains, whether that's friendshoring or onshoring or some of the popular terms that are being bandied about now, is, how do we make these markets and supply chains as really as resilient and diverse as possible while maintaining the, whether it's ESG criteria, national security and transatlantic security. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit from you on, how Estonia views some of this from the kind of transatlantic lens. I mean, you've mentioned already, investments right on the border with Russia, and how, if there's any dynamics there within the transatlantic space that you'd like to bring forward.
Well, if we try to look over the horizon into the future, which of course is not easy and is speculative, but, if we think Chinese are serious about what they are saying, then there will be at least a period of more tensions in the future ahead of us. And China is, I think, a country of 1.4 billion, so mass creates a quality of its own. And, I think neither Europeans nor Americans alone would probably feel comfortable standing faced with that kind of a potential. So I think it's pretty obvious to both of the sides that we certainly will feel way better if we stand back to back to face this situation. And this in trade, of course, means that today the transatlantic trade relationship, and when we talk from the EU side, it usually means the trade with US, but we can easily add Canada and Mexico to that as well, is certainly the world's biggest, let's say, comprehensive trade relationship, if whatever volumes you look at. Yes, there was a year when goods trade with China was slightly bigger for Europe. But if we add to that services, and if we add to that investments, it's beyond doubt that it's for both sides of the Atlantic, the relationship to take care of. And I think paradoxically, as it has been rather problem-free, we somehow take it for granted. Yes. And of course, the elections sometime in November will be another point when we need to take stock of where we are and where we go. And very clear-eyed look at the future and I think, and I hope it will be obvious to both sides that it's time to cooperate and get rid of these, let's say, small trade frictions that we seem to still have with our very good partners otherwise. So I think that's important, and that's of course means also let's say sharing maybe more on some technology, sharing on the outlook of the risks, understanding the differences of positions, because of course the US investment picture versus China is very different from the European one. The European one seems to be big industry, American seems to be the venture capital, and so that maybe also creates slightly different look at how we look at the problems. But it's very clear from our national perspective, our trade with China is an almost 1-to-4 deficit. So it's like over 300% deficit. And also on the European level, the deficit is pretty strong. And it's not that it's fluctuating. It's been like that for a long time. And this is also not sustainable. I mean, we can't keep on trading in a very unbalanced relationship with a very, very big partner. Because, for example, the same with the EU-US trade. If you take the goods and services trade together, they are more or less in balance. So it shows what the economic model would say, or the theory would say, that everybody has a comparative advantage in something, and those who have in one are selling to the other, and vice versa. And since it's more or less in balance, it's in everybody's favor. But with China, it seems to be that we are out of balance, and also that it's not in our favor.
Well, I think one of the big challenges we'll face across the Atlantic is pooling knowledge, pooling competitiveness, competing healthily on rules-based, etc., where that makes sense, but also pooling, knowledge when it comes to cooperation and sectoral knowledge, etc. So it's fascinating. Certainly between Canada and Estonia, mining can be a real enabler for the relationship. And so it's fascinating to see, not just on Ukraine and within NATO, but that Estonia and Canada have some real potential to continue to have an effect on international security. I think, as you've very well portrayed so far, that this actually extends far beyond the Euro-Atlantic space. So maybe as a final question here, I mean, when people think NATO, they think military security. They think, Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause, the fact that we are trying to deter Russian aggression, many debates about what the role is for the alliance in the Indo-Pacific. But when you think about Estonian economic competitiveness and the EU and North America, what role do you see? What role does NATO play, in this and NATO membership?
I think it's very clear that it's the, if I can put it that way, the behind the scene guarantor of the possibility to continue living and working and trading the way we want to, and we have been to. The same NPM investment into Narva, I would be ready to bet that if we would not be NATO members, that would not have happened, and not only for economic reasons, but also for security reasons. And the same, that Ericsson is investing in a new facility here, even bigger amounts than the one that went into the NPM permanent magnets factory. Because, of course, one is the investment into production facilities, but then you will have it running, then you will have the let's say, materials and going through it and products coming out. And it will be, both of them will, I estimate, be $1 billion operations a year at least, and significant employers and so on. And yes, I think the same goes, that this is something that gives you maybe not a guarantee, but at least very strong assurances that you are protected, and where the border is, that's where the line goes.
Yeah, I think it's a great point.
That's one of the enablers of economic development. It's a bit like, if you have an alarm system in your house and you switch it on, it doesn't mean the fire doesn't go on, but if the fire goes on, the alarm goes quicker, and you will be able to deal with it. So it's a bit like that.
So a little bit, in other words, the fundamentals of our security are also the fundamentals of competitiveness and prosperity.
Absolutely. And I think some of those products, of course, have usages also in military applications. And I think in Europe, we are very quickly getting over it, that, for a long time it was that military investments were, it wasn't investable for quite a lot of pension funds and investment companies and so on. It was a bit like, with tobacco. That at one point there was a pressure not to invest into that. But I think the investments into the defense production sector will change from that aspect. That it will be part of the normal economic side of it as well. And of course, also in Europe will be putting much more money into defense in the coming years compared with the past. And so far, actually, the statistics shows that quite a lot of that procurement happens from outside Europe. Of course, in Europe, there are countries who want to change it, and over time, I believe that that's what's going to happen. But I think out of that, which goes out of Europe, 80% goes over the Atlantic. But I think that's mostly American, but some other countries might be there in their production value chains involved in the earlier stages. Hinting maybe Canadian materials used in America to sell products to Europe.
So maybe as one more point here, it probably is worth mentioning what percentage of the gross domestic product Estonia contributes to defense as kind of this insurance policy as some might describe it, and kind of as again kind of a foundational investment in making sure that we can pursue economic relations with rules-based markets, etc. I know Estonia and Poland are in a bit of a competition, I think, for top GDP spenders. Do you have an update on where Estonia is at this moment?
We will be this year over 3%. I think maybe even already last year we were over 3%. Yes. So that's what we invest, and of course that's investment into our own defense forces. So this is something we'll have, but we have to also keep in mind that we are a small country, so we need allies. And also that in defense, basically we inherited nothing from when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russian troops left. They took everything with them, also the toilet seats. As you know, the Russian habit from Ukraine, it wasn't something they developed in Ukraine. So we have started building the defense capability basically from zero. So there's still quite a lot of, let's say, investment side catch up, because these things all are long term. But then again, we are, as a percentage from our defense expenditure, quite a lot goes into procurement. So that has been helping us quite a lot. And also we already in 22, before the conflict in Ukraine started, we were able to give some pretty sophisticated American weapons from our stocks to Ukrainians, which might have had quite a significant part in stopping the initial onslaught. As you remember, everybody said Kiev will be taken in 3 days and so on. But Ukrainians managed to resist that, and some of the kit they were using was donated by Estonia. So very proud about that.
Yeah, another aspect certainly shared between Canada and Estonia is strong commitment to Ukraine's independence and freedom and victory in this war. Maybe as a final point here as we end, I always like to think, we have a good sense here of some of the opportunities and dynamics. What do you think the next steps are? And is there anything in particular, Estonia and Canada, or even, if you want to think in terms of European Union and North America, what would you like to kind of see happen to strengthen this resilience that we've been speaking about kind of in terms of our economic security?
I've been shocking my European colleagues, and almost always when there's been a possibility to say something about America, what I have said is that actually what we want is a free trade agreement. And it is very clear that politically this is not on the table at the moment, and seems to be that the US is still undergoing this reflection period that how come the multilateral trading system doesn't work so well for them anymore as they would hope. I would still make the claim it's working very well for them and it's working well for us, and we'd like to keep it. But yeah, that's what I always like to say, and then my colleagues look at me basically with a face that, again he's saying that, doesn't he understand that this is not realistic at the moment? But I think we have to keep it in the back of our heads, like I said here in the middle somewhere, that this is the most important trading relation we have. So why not codify it and make it future-proof and remove these doubts that might exist on some specific cases. I'll be blunt here, but to have tariff quotas on steel and aluminium with a national security reasoning on your allies, something here in this logical chain is broken. It just doesn't make any sense. And then there are these small things, when you say the overall thing is going well, but you have these nagging small differences. So if we somehow could get rid of them, that would be very nice. what concerns Canada, then I think Estonia was the first one to ratify the CETA. So we really believe in free trade. We might have been the second, but I think we were the first one. And that doesn't matter because, of course, it is applied at the moment. But then again, some of our European colleagues are still struggling with their parliaments. So that's the way the thing is.
Yeah, certainly Canada appreciated that all three of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, were among the first to make sure CETA was on the books, the Canadian European Union Free Trade Agreement. So that's exactly the sort of leadership that the transatlantic community needs. Jüri, I think you've done a great job of showing that some of the challenges that we face in debates in our own countries, whether it's around protectionism or whether it's around onshoring, friendshoring, etc., how a country can, in fact, position itself to benefit at all the points of the value chain and generate jobs for, not just in the high end tech part, but across the board in terms of good jobs for people for every, in everyday life. And I think that is worth keeping in mind all the time when we speak about these matters, that, ensuring our populace understands how the defense commitments and how the, efforts for economic security are not just high level policy discussions, but are everyday life, meat and potatoes sorts of issues. So thank you so much. After a busy week for you, no doubt, at the end of the day in Tallinn. I'm thrilled that you came to join us today on Inside Policy Talks. I hope we can do it again in the future. And to our audience, thanks for listening in, and we'll see you with more programming in the weeks to come. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.